Phlegm-like Kobali blood splattered Gerald's face as his armored fist pulverized the snarling alien's skull, bits of purple brain matter exploding outwards. He had to protect the abandoned Kobali girl no matter what. Her life depended on it. Gerald Gordon ripped his blood-soaked hand free of the dead Kobali's head and whirled to face the next attacker. 3 more angry Kobali males charged him, desperate to recapture the small, purple-skinned child cowering behind the human. They brandished crude clubs and let out guttural war cries, their beady eyes flashing with rage. The human explorer had crash-landed on planet Xylox mere minutes ago. Smoke still poured from the ruined hulk of his spacecraft. He had barely taken 10 steps from the wreckage when he spotted the terrified alien girl fleeing a pack of adult Kobali giving chase. She stumbled and fell. The males closed in, clubs raised to beat her. That's when Gerald acted on instinct. His armor-enhanced speed and strength made short work of the Kobali attackers. Gerald scattered their broken bodies across the rocky orange Xylox soil, buying a momentary reprieve. The girl looked up at him with teary eyes, quivering in fear but alive. Gerald knelt down and extended a hand. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." She clearly didn't understand his words but sensed his peaceful intent. The girl tentatively took his hand, and Gerald helped her to her feet. He towered over the tiny, thin Kobali child, her features delicate and frail compared to the hulking human. Gerald activated his comms translation module and cycled through Kobalish phrases until he found what he needed. "Why they want hurt you?" he asked in chopped alien speech. The girl pointed a shaky finger at her own purple skin, tears welling up. "Bad color. Curse. Kobali way. Abandon bad color children. Leave die. Hunt and kill if defy exile, is Kobali law." Gerald felt a surge of outrage and knew he couldn't abandon this forsaken child on a hostile world. His ship would take weeks to repair, but until then, he vowed to protect her. He picked up the girl in his armored arms. "You're safe with me now. I'll look after you until I leave this planet. What's your name?" "Fornax," she replied meekly. Gerald carried Fornax back towards his wrecked ship. He would need to set up defenses and prepare for more Kobali coming to hunt her down. The stakes were clear. If he failed to keep her safe, she would suffer a cruel death at the hands of her own species. Her only hope was this strange alien called a human. As Gerald worked to fortify the crash site, he taught Fornax simple English words and phrases, speaking to her about human culture, morals, and enlightened views so different from the harsh Kobali ways. A friendship slowly formed, the girl's initial fear replaced by fascination and trust. 2 weeks later, Kobali warships appeared in the sky, descending on Gerald's position. A recon vessel had detected the human's crash and dispatched a strike team to eliminate him and return Fornax to face punishment. Alarms blared in the human's makeshift compound. He scooped up the girl and placed her in the armored shelter he'd built. "Stay here," Gerald told Fornax, his tone dead serious. He grabbed a plasma rifle and headed out to face the Kobali warriors hunting them both. Fornax watched him go with wide, hopeful eyes, praying to the human gods that her protector and friend would triumph. She feared the cruelty of Kobali justice and their barbaric treatment of females and cursed children, praying Gerald could overcome those oppressive ways. The human was her only hope. The alternative was a brutal death. As plasma fire lit up the landscape and the human explorer fought for both their lives, little Fornax huddled in the shelter, listening to the language module Gerald had given her. She quietly recited a new phrase she had just learned, one that gave her hope for the future. "Human, save me." Gerald worked feverishly to fortify the crash site perimeter, sweat pouring down his face inside the armor. He welded together metal plates, rerouted power from the ship's damaged core, and programmed salvaged components to create a network of force field emitters and automated sentry guns. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do. As he labored, Fornax shadowed him like a curious puppy, her eyes wide as she watched the human work. She pointed at a sentry turret. "What that?" she asked. Gerald smiled. Maybe some impromptu lessons were in order. "That's a gun. It shoots fast to stop bad guys. Gun, Fornax repeated slowly. Shoots fast, stops bad guys. Over the next few hours, Gerald continued his crash course in English and Basic Tech 101 for Fornax, even as warning indicators flashed of incoming hostiles. He couldn't help but marvel at her sharp mind. She soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. If they survived this, maybe he could even teach her. A shrill proximity alert pierced the air. The Kobali had arrived. Gerald checked the scopes and grimaced. A full platoon of heavily armed Kobali shock troopers had landed nearby, led by a hulking brute in spiked armor, Commander Corax. They pounded towards the humans' defenses with clear hostile intent. The first force field crackled to life as they ran into it, sending Kobali troops sprawling. Corax bellowed orders and they regrouped, launching salvo after salvo of plasma grenades. The shield flared but held, for now. Corax's eyes narrowed as he saw Fornax peeking out from behind Gerald through the flickering barrier, her purple skin unmistakable. He bared sharpened teeth and called out in rough English. Human! Give us girl. Kobali law say she must punish. You no interfere our ways. Gerald stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Fornax and Corax. He raised his voice to be heard over the din of plasma fire. I can't do that, Corax. Fornax is an innocent child. She's done nothing wrong. Your laws are cruel and unjust. Corax spat in disgust. Zephyri scum not innocent. Kobali way is punish. No allow weak race live. Gerald's mind raced. Zephyri? Weak race? What was Corax talking about? He glanced back at Fornax cowering behind him, her purple skin vivid against the orange Xylox soil. No time to dwell on it now. Gerald tried one last desperate ploy. What if I took Fornax with me, Corax? I'll leave your planet. You'll never see us again. No one has to die today. The Kobali commander laughed harshly. No deal, human. You meddle Kobali affairs. Now you also punish. We take girl, and we take you. With that, Corax barked orders and his troops renewed their assault, blasting the force fields with everything they had. Gerald's heart sank as he saw the charge levels dwindling rapidly. They couldn't hold out much longer. He sprinted back towards the ship with Fornax in tow. He had to get those engines online now. As he ran, Fornax piped up. Gerald, I Zephyri. Kobali killed Zephyri long ago. Kobali hate us still. The pieces started coming together in Gerald's mind even as he frantically cross-wired propulsion circuits. The cultural database entries he had skimmed, the bits of history he had gleaned. The Kobali had committed genocide against the Zephyri, wiping them out centuries ago in a brutal war of racial purity. But some must have survived, passing on their genes in secret. Now any child with Zephyri traits like Fornax's purple skin was abandoned, lest the Kobali's great crime come to light. Anger coursed through Gerald. This was about more than saving one girl. An entire oppressed people were still out there, living in fear, yearning to be free. If he could get Fornax out, show the galaxy what the Kobali had done and were still doing. The ship's computer blared, engines online, shields critical, it was now or never. Gerald slammed the thrusters to full and raced towards the bridge, scooping up Fornax on the way. Corax roared in rage as he saw the ship coming to life, the last force fields sputtering out. Kobali troops poured into the breach. With seconds to spare, Gerald reached the cockpit and punched in coordinates for a pre-programmed flight path. The ship lurched forward on autopilot, knocking Kobali troops aside like bowling pins as it hurtled into the sky. Corax screamed curses after it, shaking his fists in fury, until the personal cloaking field around Gerald and Fornax dissipated, revealing them crouched behind a boulder mere meters away. The ship had been a decoy, buying them time to escape. Before Corax could react, Gerald threw himself and Fornax into a hidden escape pod, engaging the cloak and firing the thrusters. The pod shot off towards the nearby moon as the Kobali strike team unleashed a barrage of futile plasma fire behind it, Corax's howls of rage echoing in its wake. Inside the pod, Fornax looked up at Gerald, her purple face streaked with tears, but now also lit by a fragile hope. What we do now? Gerald squeezed her shoulder reassuringly as the pod soared towards a new hiding place, a new chance. Now we fight back. We gather proof of what the Kobali did to your people. We find other Zephyrian hiding. His eyes gleamed with perseverance. And we light the spark of revolution. The escape pod shuddered as it broke through Xylox 2's thin atmosphere. Gerald gripped the controls, guiding them towards a barren, cratered landscape. Fornax peered out the view screen, her purple face reflecting the stark moonscape. There, Gerald said, pointing to a dark crevice. We'll set down there. The pod touched down with a jolt. Gerald popped the hatch and they climbed out onto the dusty surface. Fornax stumbled, unused to the low gravity. Gerald steadied her as they made their way to a cave mouth. Inside, Gerald set up a makeshift camp using supplies from the pod. As Fornax huddled near a portable heater, Gerald explored deeper into the cave. His helmet lights illuminated ancient metal panels and dormant computer terminals. This was some kind of base, he muttered, brushing dust off a console. Hours passed as Gerald tinkered with the old tech. Finally, a screen flickered to life, filling with Zephyrian text. Gerald's eyes widened as he scanned the information. Fornax, he called, come look at this. The girl scampered over. Gerald pointed to schematics of sleek weapons and images of purple-skinned people. These are your people, he said softly. The Zephyrians. They had a whole civilization here before the Kobali. Gerald trailed off, not wanting to upset her, but Fornax nodded solemnly. I know, she said. Grandma told stories, said we hide now. Gerald's fingers flew over the console, downloading everything he could to a data chip. This was the evidence they needed to expose the Kobali's crimes. A shrill alarm pierced the air. Gerald raced to the cave mouth, Fornax at his heels. Far above, Kobali ships streaked across the sky. They found us, Fornax whimpered. Gerald's mind raced. They had to contact the resistance now. He sprinted back to the old Zephyrian tech, yanking parts from the pod to cobble together a transmitter. As Fornax kept watch, Gerald broadcast the coded signal from the archives. Seconds ticked by. Then a voice crackled through. This is Zephyr. Who is this? How did you get this frequency? Gerald explained rapidly. Zephyr's voice grew urgent. Your signal's been intercepted. Kobali forces inbound. Get to Corax Prime. Coordinates follow. Use these codes to slip past their sensors. Hurry. They bolted for the pod. Gerald punched in the stolen codes as they lifted off. The Kobali ships swarmed, but the little pod slipped through their net. Gerald let out a breath as they cleared the blockade. We made it. But his relief was short-lived. As they neared Corax Prime, warning lights flashed. The pod systems failed. Zephar's codes already obsolete. A Kobali patrol swooped in, plasma bolts sizzling past. Gerald wrenched the controls, aiming for the grimy outskirts of the Kobali city below. Hang on, he shouted to Fornax. The pod slammed into the ground, skidding through piles of industrial waste. When it finally stopped, Gerald pulled himself from the wreckage, lifting Fornax out after him. Smoke rose from the ruined pod. In the distance, sirens wailed. Gerald looked down at Fornax, her eyes wide with fear but trusting. He took her small purple hand in his. Stay close, he said. We've got a long way to go. They set off into the shadows of Corax Prime slums, the first step of a perilous journey to find the resistance and bring down an empire built on genocide. The escape pod slammed into the industrial wasteland of Corax Prime, carving a deep furrow through mounds of rusted scrap. Gerald yanked off his safety harness and turned to Fornax. You okay? She nodded, purple skin ashen. Hurts. Gerald pried open the hatch. Acrid smoke filled his lungs. We gotta move. Grab anything useful. They stumbled from the wreckage. Gerald winced as he put weight on his leg, probably sprained. He snatched up a medkit and tucked it into his pack. Fornax found an old datapad. Sirens wailed in the distance. Gerald grabbed Fornax's hand. This way, stay low. They limped through piles of industrial waste, ducking behind rusted-out hulks of machinery. The slums loomed ahead, a maze of ramshackle dwellings and twisting alleys. A Kobali dropship roared overhead. Gerald pulled Fornax into the shadow of a corroded storage tank. He held his breath as armored troops fanned out, scanning for signs of their prey. "Spread out!" a gruff voice barked. "Find that human and the Zephyri scum. Commander Korax wants them alive." Gerald's mind raced. They needed to lose their pursuers and find shelter, fast. He led Fornax deeper into the slums. The streets grew narrower, choked with refuse. Furtive eyes watched from boarded-up windows. A Kobali patrol rounded the corner ahead. Gerald ducked into a dingy alley, pulling Fornax behind a dumpster. He fumbled with his wrist computer, tapping in a quick command. The patrol's sensors flickered and died. "What happened?" one trooper growled. "Sensors malfunctioning, damn slum interference." They moved on. Gerald let out a shaky breath. Hour after hour they evaded patrols, but exhaustion took its toll. Gerald's limp worsened. Fornax's steps grew unsteady. He pulled up the Zephyrian archive on his datapad. There had to be something. A name caught his eye. Grax, arms dealer, information broker. It was a risk, but they were out of options. Gerald led them to a rundown cantina. The bartender, a hulking alien, glared as they entered. "We don't serve your kind here." Gerald slipped him a credit chit. "I'm looking for Grax." The bartender jerked his head toward a back room. Inside, a wizened creature hunched over a cluttered desk. Grax's bulbous eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" "No one. I need information about a safe house." Grax cackled. "Information costs. What you got?" Gerald laid his remaining gear on the desk. "Everything I have left." Grax pawed through it, muttering. Finally he nodded. "Acceptable. The safe house is—" The door burst open. Kobali troops poured in, weapons raised. "Hands up, human!" their leader barked. "You're under arrest!" Grax dove for cover as plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Gerald tackled Fornax, shielding her with his body. The cantina erupted in chaos. Patrons scattered. Gerald crawled toward the exit, dragging Fornax. He glimpsed Grax slipping out a hidden door, pocketing a Kobali comm unit. The double-crossing bastard had sold them out. A stray bolt grazed Gerald's shoulder. He cried out in pain. "Gerald!" Fornax screamed. He turned to see Kobali troops dragging her away. He lunged for her, but strong hands grabbed him from behind. "No!" he roared as Fornax vanished into the melee. A rifle butt slammed into his head. The world went dark. Gerald came to in a filthy alley, head throbbing. Fornax was gone, his gear stripped. He was alone. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. No, he had to focus, find allies, save Fornax. A group of ragged youths watched him from the shadows. One stepped forward, plasma pistol in hand. "You the human everyone's looking for?" Gerald tensed, ready to fight. "Who's asking?" The youth grinned. "Someone who hates the Kobali as much as you do. Word is you got dirt on them, enough to bring them down. That true?" Gerald nodded warily. "Then maybe we can help each other out. Name's Zix. Welcome to the Resistance." Zix nodded to Gerald. "We're ready. Let's get your friend back." The slum punks split into two groups. Zix led the diversion team, while Gerald and 5 others prepared to infiltrate the sewers. Explosions rocked the Kobali stronghold's outer defenses. Alarms blared as guards rushed to defend against the assault. Gerald's team slipped into a rusty sewer grate, wading through foul-smelling muck. At the first security door, Gerald tapped stolen codes into his wrist computer. The lock clicked open. They crept inside, plasma rifles at the ready. The first checkpoint erupted in chaos. Gerald ducked behind a metal crate as energy bolts sizzled past. He popped up, squeezing off 3 quick shots. A Kobali guard crumpled. "Push forward," Gerald shouted. They battled through corridor after corridor. Gerald's arms ached from the constant recoil. His lungs burned from acrid smoke. But Fornax's face drove him onward. Then he heard it, a muffled scream of pain. Fornax. "This way!" Gerald sprinted toward the sound, heedless of danger. They rounded a corner, an ambush. Elite Kobali troops opened fire from fortified positions. "Take cover!" Gerald dove behind a pillar. Plasma bolts scorched the metal inches from his face. He glanced around. 3 of his team lay motionless on the floor. "We're pinned down," one punk yelled. Gerald's mind raced. He pulled out their last explosive charge. "Cover me!" He dashed forward, hurling the charge. It detonated with a thunderous roar. When the smoke cleared, a gaping hole led to the interrogation chamber. Gerald charged through the debris. He saw Fornax strapped to a chair, her purple skin bruised and bleeding. Commander Korax loomed over her, energy blade poised to strike. Gerald's rifle barked. Korax's guards fell. The commander whirled, eyes blazing with hate. "You!" Korax snarled. He lunged at Gerald, swinging the crackling energy blade. Gerald barely dodged, feeling the heat sear his cheek. They grappled furiously. Korax's superior strength drove Gerald back. The human's arms trembled as he struggled to keep the blade from his throat. Suddenly, Korax howled in pain. Fornax had kicked a jagged piece of metal into his leg. Gerald seized the moment. He slammed his forehead into Korax's face, shattering the Kobali's nose. As Korax staggered, Gerald's hands found his throat. With a primal roar, Gerald crushed the life from his foe. Korax's body went limp. Gerald staggered to Fornax, freeing her bonds. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. Gerald helped her up as more explosions rocked the stronghold. "We've got to move," he said. "This place is coming down." They stumbled into the corridor. Freed Zephyrian prisoners joined them, arming themselves with fallen guards' weapons. Gerald led them through the chaos. Kobali reinforcements swarmed in, but the ragtag band fought with desperate fury. Zix and the other punks appeared, adding their firepower to the escape. They battled street by street through the industrial wasteland. Gerald's muscles screamed for rest, but he pushed on. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the slums. Zix gestured to a hidden bunker. "In here, we'll be safe." As the exhausted rebels filed inside, Gerald gazed at the burning stronghold in the distance. He turned to Fornax, her resilient spirit shining through her battered face. "What now?" she asked. Gerald squeezed her hand. "Now we take the fight to them, all of them." Gerald followed Fornax through winding tunnels deep beneath the slums of Korax Prime. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and sweat as they descended into the heart of the rebel base. Fornax's purple skin gleamed in the dim light of scattered glow panels. They emerged into a cavernous chamber filled with makeshift workstations and bustling with activity. Zephyrian rebels of all ages moved with purpose, checking weapons and poring over data screens. A tall, battle-scarred Zephyrian approached. "Welcome, human. I am Zifar." Gerald nodded, taking in the rebel leader's stern features. "Gerald, thanks for the assist earlier." Zifar led them to a central hub where other rebel leaders gathered. Gerald pulled out his datapad and connected it to the main display. "I've got something you need to see," he said, tapping commands. The screen filled with images and text from the Zephyrian archive. Gasps and growls of anger rippled through the assembled rebels as the full extent of Kobali atrocities became clear. An older Zephyrian, his purple skin faded to lavender, smacked his palm on the table. "By the gods, they didn't just conquer us. They tried to erase us entirely." Zypher's eyes narrowed. "This changes everything. We have the evidence we need to rally our people." He turned to Gerald. "You've given us hope, human. Now we need your skills." Gerald nodded, already formulating plans. "I can hack their systems, create chaos in their command structure, but we'll need a multi-pronged attack." Zypher's mouth curved in a grim smile. "I've spent years infiltrating their military-industrial complex. We have sleeper agents and weapon caches across multiple cities. We just needed the spark to light the fire." For hours, they planned. Gerald's fingers flew across keyboards, exploiting vulnerabilities in Kobali networks. Alarms blared in Kobali command centers as their systems went haywire, feeding false data and contradictory orders. Across Corax Prime and beyond, Zephyrian agents sprang into action. Power grids sputtered and died. Communication relays fell silent. In the confusion, heavily armed rebel cells surged from hiding places. Overwhelming Kobali security forces caught flat-footed. Gerald watched tactical displays as Kobali strongholds fell one by one. "It's working," he breathed. Fornax gripped his arm. "My turn," she said, her young face set with fierce drive. She led a strike team to a massive Kobali labor camp. Gerald monitored their progress via comlink, his chest tight with worry. The sounds of battle crackled over the link, plasma fire, shouted orders, cries of pain and triumph. Then Fornax's voice, breathless but exultant. "We did it! The camp is ours!" Thousands of newly freed Zephyrians poured from the camp, snatching up weapons and joining the fight. The tide of rebellion swelled. But the decisive blow was yet to come. Gerald suited up, his heart pounding as he prepared to board Zephyr's stealth shuttle. The cramped vessel clung to the hull of the massive Kobali battle station, its docking tube extending like a metal umbilical. Gerald took a deep breath and pushed off, floating through the airlock. He navigated the station's corridors, evading patrols and slipping past security checkpoints. At last, he reached the central computer core. His fingers danced across the alien interface, overriding safeguards and rewriting command protocols. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he raced against time. A final keystroke, and the battle station's systems came under Zephyrian control. Gerald sagged with relief, then keyed his comlink. "We're in." The station's weapons turned on its former masters, raining destruction on Kobali military targets. Within days, the once mighty Kobali war machine lay in ruins. Gerald stood beside Fornax and Zephyr as they prepared to broadcast their ultimatum. He uploaded the damning archive data, ensuring the truth of Kobali crimes would be known to all. Zephyr's voice rang out across every comm channel. "Kobali leaders, your reign of terror ends now. Surrender or face the justice of those you sought to destroy." They waited, tension thick in the air. Then, one by one, Kobali commanders signaled their capitulation. Fornax's eyes shone with unshed tears as she turned to Gerald. "We did it," she whispered. "We're free." "Free!" Gerald's words hung in the air as cheers erupted across Corax Prime. Zephyrians poured into the streets, their purple skin gleaming under the planet's twin suns. Gerald watched as Fornax stepped onto a makeshift platform, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "Today marks the dawn of a new era for our people," she declared. "We will build a society of equals, where no being suffers under the boot of tyranny." As interim ruler, Fornax wasted no time. Gerald observed her tirelessly working to dismantle Kobali power structures, freeing prisoners, and establishing new democratic institutions. But beneath the celebrations, a sinister threat lurked. In a hidden bunker deep beneath the city, General Varax snarled at his followers. "Those vermin think they've won. We'll show them the true might of the Kobali." He gestured to a row of canisters, each bearing biohazard symbols. "Our bioweapon will cleanse this world of the Zephyrian plague." Days later, as fireworks lit up the night sky over Corax Prime's central plaza, Varax's agents struck. Canisters hissed open, releasing an invisible mist into the air. At first, no one noticed. Then the screaming began. Gerald pushed through the panicked crowd, his heart racing as he saw Fornax collapse. Her skin, normally a vibrant purple, had taken on a sickly gray pallor. He caught her as she fell, her body burning with fever. "Gerald," she gasped, her eyes unfocused. "What's happening?" Before he could answer, Zephyr's frantic voice crackled over his comm. "Gerald! It's spreading too fast! Fornax! She's dying! We need you!" Gerald's mind raced. The archive. There had to be something. He sprinted to the Rebel Command Center, fingers flying over holographic displays as he searched the ancient Zephyrian records. There. A hidden lab, buried for centuries. Gerald grabbed a weapon and emergency med kit, then commandeered a hoverbike. He sped through the chaos-filled streets, dodging fleeing civilians and the occasional pocket of Kobali insurgents. The lab entrance was hidden beneath a crumbling industrial complex. Gerald blasted through the rusty doors, descending into darkness. Kobali voices echoed from side passages. They were hunting him. Gerald crept through dimly lit corridors, every shadow a potential threat. At last he found it, a sealed chamber filled with ancient equipment. Carefully he extracted a vial of preserved cell cultures. Crack! A plasma bolt sizzled past his head. Gerald dove for cover as Kobali troops poured into the lab. He returned fire, the air thick with ozone and the screams of the wounded. Suddenly, the ground shook. A hidden explosive charge detonated, bringing down part of the ceiling. Gerald found himself pinned, choking on dust and debris. This was it. He'd failed. Gerald closed his eyes, waiting for the end. "Gerald," a familiar voice called out. Impossible. He looked up to see Fornax, her face pale and drawn, but alive. She clawed at the rubble, freeing him from the debris. "How?" Gerald coughed. Fornax managed a weak smile. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." More explosions rocked the facility. Fornax's eyes widened. "Verax, he's found us." She pushed the vial into Gerald's hands. "Go, I'll hold them off." "No!" Gerald protested, but Fornax was already moving. She grabbed a fallen Kobali's weapon and charged towards the sounds of battle. Gerald ran, the precious vial clutched to his chest. He burst out of the lab into the war-torn streets of Korax Prime. A massive shape loomed ahead, a Kobali warwalker, its weapons trained on him. "Did you think you could escape me, human?" Verax's voice boomed from the machine. "Your pathetic rebellion ends here." Gerald ducked as the warwalker's guns blazed to life. He sprinted through the rubble-strewn landscape, plasma bolts carving furrows in the ground at his heels. The chase seemed endless. Gerald's lungs burned as he pushed himself to the limit. He vaulted over fallen buildings, slid under collapsing structures, always one step ahead of Verax's relentless pursuit. Finally, Gerald spotted salvation. A rebel medical team, their stealth shuttle waiting. He put on a final burst of speed, hurling himself into the craft as Verax's warwalker bore down on them. "Go!" Gerald shouted. The shuttle's engines roared to life. As they lifted off, Gerald saw the warwalker stumble, one of its legs caught in a sinkhole. It toppled, crashing to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. Back at the rebel base, Gerald handed over the precious vial. He watched anxiously as doctors worked to synthesize a cure. Fornax lay on a nearby bed, her breathing shallow. Hours passed, then a shout of triumph. The cure worked. Gerald held Fornax's hand as the doctors administered the treatment. Slowly, color returned to her skin. Fornax's eyes fluttered open. "Did we win?" she asked weakly. Gerald squeezed her hand. "We did, but it's not over yet." Gerald's eyes snapped open, his heart racing as he processed the gravity of their situation. Fornax lay on the medical bed, her purple skin still ashen. The initial dose had stabilized her, but it wasn't enough. "We need more," Gerald said, his voice hoarse. "A lot more." Zephyr nodded grimly. "Our scientists have identified a possible location, an ancient Zephyrian lab buried deep beneath the southern deserts." Gerald studied the holomap, taking in the treacherous terrain. Acid storms raged across the landscape, while dormant volcanoes loomed ominously in the distance. "Verax's forces control that entire region," Zephyr continued. "We'll be fighting our way in." Gerald grabbed his gear, checking his weapons. "Then let's move. Fornax is running out of time." Hours later, their armored transport rumbled across the caustic wasteland. Gerald peered through the view screen, watching sulfuric acid eat away at the vehicle's protective coating. A sudden explosion rocked the transport. "Ambush!" Zephyr shouted. Gerald scrambled to the gun turret. Through the acrid haze, he saw Verax's hunter-killer drones swarming toward them. He opened fire, plasma bolts lancing out to vaporize the hostile machines. The battle raged for hours as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. Gerald's muscles ached from the constant combat, but he refused to yield. Finally, they crested a ridge and saw their target. The Kobali stronghold rose from the toxic desert like a metal tumor, its lowest levels burrowing deep underground. "There's our lab," Gerald said. He turned to Sci-Fi. "I'm going in alone. Less chance of detection." Sci-Fi clasped Gerald's arm. "May the ancestors guide you." Gerald approached the base, his stolen Kobali armor chafing uncomfortably. He presented his forged credentials to the guard, praying the deception would hold. "Another mercenary?" the guard sneered. "General Varax will decide if you're worthy." Gerald was escorted deep into the facility. He fought to keep his face neutral as he passed rows of bioweapon canisters. One misstep could doom billions. Varax's cold eyes bored into Gerald. "You claim to want to join our glorious cause. Prove it." What followed was a nightmarish gauntlet of loyalty tests. Gerald sabotaged rebel equipment, recited Kobali propaganda, and even executed a holographic prisoner. Each act made his stomach churn, but he buried his revulsion deep. "One final test," Varax declared. He gestured to a massive arena door. "Defeat my champion, and you may join us." The door creaked open, revealing a hulking monstrosity. The Kobali champion towered over Gerald, its muscles rippling beneath translucent skin. Surgical scars and metal implants crisscrossed its body. Gerald circled warily, searching for a weakness. The brute charged, its fists whistling through the air. Gerald ducked and rolled, barely avoiding the crushing blows. He couldn't match the creature's strength, but perhaps he could outsmart it. Gerald feinted left, then sprang right. As the beast stumbled, he drove his shock baton into a cluster of implants at its neck. The champion howled in agony, electricity arcing across its body. Gerald pressed his advantage, striking again and again until the monster finally collapsed. Varax's laughter echoed through the arena. "Well fought, human. You've earned your place among us." Gerald allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Now the real work could begin. As the base celebrated his victory, Gerald slipped away. He activated his comm link, signaling Sci-Fi to commence the attack. Alarms blared as rebel forces stormed the facility. Gerald raced through the chaos, descending into the ancient catacombs beneath the stronghold. The passages were a maze of death traps and ancient defenses. Gerald narrowly avoided disintegration beams and poison darts as he pressed deeper into the ruins. Finally, he emerged into a vast cavern. A ziggurat of impossible size dominated the space, its apex vanishing into darkness above. Gerald knew without doubt the lab waited at the top. He began to climb, using recovered Zephyrian tech to bypass force fields and laser grids. Behind him, the sounds of battle grew louder as Varax's forces gave chase. Sci-Fi's voice crackled over the comm. "We're buying you time, Gerald, but hurry!" Gerald reached the summit, his lungs burning. Before him stood a sealed vault door covered in alien script. He plugged in a decryption device and prayed. The door hissed open. Gerald rushed inside, quickly locating the gene banks and data cores. He began downloading everything he could. A thunderous crash shook the ziggurat. Gerald whirled to see a monstrous war machine tear through the wall. Varax's laughter boomed from within the cockpit. "Did you think you could fool me, human?" the general sneered. "I'll crush you and your pathetic rebellion." Gerald dove for cover as the war droid opened fire. He had to complete the download and escape, or all was lost. Lost. Gerald clutched the precious data cores, his mind racing. He couldn't let Varax win, not after everything they'd sacrificed. The war droid's massive arm swung, pulverizing the ancient stone beside Gerald's head. He rolled, narrowly avoiding death, and sprinted for the ziggurat's edge. "Run, little human," Varax's voice boomed. "It changes nothing." Gerald leapt, activating his grav chute at the last second. He plummeted through the cavern, dodging falling debris as the ziggurat crumbled behind him. Hours later, Gerald stumbled into the rebel command center. Scientists swarmed around him, carefully extracting the recovered genetic samples. Zypher's eyes widened as he examined the data. By the ancestors, this could be the key. For days, Gerald paced the cramped corridors of their hidden asteroid base. The air recyclers hummed, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. In the makeshift lab, Zypher and his team worked tirelessly, analyzing the ancient Zephyrian DNA. A sudden commotion drew Gerald's attention. He rushed to the communications hub, where technicians huddled around a crackling view screen. Verax's scarred face filled the display. "Zephyrian vermin," the general snarled. "Your stolen freedom ends now. Surrender or watch your homeworld burn." The feed cut to images of a massive orbital fortress. Bioweapon canisters glinted ominously in its holds. Fornax pushed herself up from her sickbed, her purple skin still pale. "Never," she rasped. "We'll die free." Gerald's fists clenched. "Then we take the fight to him." The next days were a frenzy of activity. Rebel engineers cobbled together an armada from salvaged hulks and hollowed-out asteroids. Gerald drilled his strike teams relentlessly, preparing for the assault of their lives. As Gerald strapped himself into the command chair of their lead infiltrator, Fornax's voice crackled over the comm. "You're our best hope, Gerald. End this." The infiltrators slipped through the debris field surrounding Verax's fortress. Ahead, Rebel capital ships engaged the station's defenses in a furious light show. "Now!" Gerald barked. His craft surged forward, slipping past energy beams to latch onto the fortress's hull. Cutting torches flared to life, carving an entrance. Gerald led his Marines through twisting corridors. The staccato of gunfire echoed as they fought their way deeper. Bodies, Rebel and Kobali alike, littered their path. A massive blast door stood before them. Beyond it lay Verax and his bioweapon stockpile. Gerald planted breaching charges, steeling himself for the final push. The door blew inward. Gerald's team surged through the smoke, weapons blazing. And there, in the center of the cavernous chamber, stood Verax, encased in a monstrous war droid that dwarfed even his previous machine. "Fools!" Verax roared. He slammed a massive fist into a control panel. Alarms blared. Canisters hissed open, spewing sickly green mist. Gerald's Marines fell, choking and gasping. "No!" Gerald screamed. He fired desperately at Verax's impenetrable armor, watching helplessly as the bioweapon spread. A deafening explosion rocked the chamber. Through the new breach stumbled Fornax, leading a battered squad of rebels. "Gerald," she shouted, "the EMP!" Understanding dawned. Gerald sprinted for cover as Fornax activated the device. A blinding pulse erupted, washing over Verax's war droid. The titanic machine lurched, sparks flying from its joints. Gerald seized his chance. He pulled out a vial of the countermeasure serum and hurled it into the thickest concentration of the bioweapon fog. The mist dissipated, neutralized by the Zephyrian cure. Verax howled in fury, his crippled war droid flailing. Gerald advanced, his remaining team laying down, suppressing fire. He reached the droid's cockpit, ripping it open to reveal Verax's stunned form. "It's over," Gerald said, hauling the general out. As the last pockets of resistance crumbled, Gerald gazed out at the debris-strewn battlefield. The price of victory had been steep, but at last the Zephyrian people could. The Zephyrian homeworld lay in ruins. Gerald stared out the viewport of the rebel ship as it descended through a haze of radioactive clouds. Twisted metal and shattered buildings stretched as far as the eye could see. The once lush forests were now blackened stumps, and rivers ran thick with toxic sludge. As the ship touched down, Fornax stumbled out onto the scorched earth. Her purple skin was ashen, her eyes wide with horror. She fell to her knees, hands clawing at the contaminated soil. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Gerald approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Fornax." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "We won, but at what cost? My people, our world." All around them, the few surviving Zephyrians emerged from the wreckage. Their wails of anguish echoed across the desolate landscape. Gerald's mind raced. He couldn't let it end like this. He activated his risk computer, quickly analyzing atmospheric data and radiation levels. "Fornax," he said urgently, "all may not be lost. I have a plan." He explained his idea, using advanced human terraforming technology to rehabilitate the planet. Fornax listened intently, hope slowly rekindling in her eyes. "It will take years," Gerald cautioned, "but I believe we can do it." Fornax stood, wiping away her tears. "Then we must begin at once." Over the next weeks, Gerald worked tirelessly to set up the first terraforming hub. Massive atmospheric scrubbers hummed to life, filtering toxins from the air. Nanobots swarmed through the soil, breaking down contaminants. Fornax rallied her people, organizing work crews to clear debris and salvage resources. The days were long and grueling, but slowly, patches of green began to reappear. Years passed. Gerald and Fornax toiled side by side, their bond deepening with each hardship overcome. They shared quiet moments watching new seedlings sprout and celebrated as the first animals returned to the recovering forests. One evening, as twin moons rose over a rejuvenated lake, Fornax turned to Gerald. Words weren't necessary. The look they shared spoke volumes, human and Zephyrian, united in purpose and heart. But their joy was short-lived. Fornax collapsed during a council meeting, her skin mottled with strange lesions. Gerald rushed her to the medical bay, his heart pounding. "It's a mutated pathogen," the Zephyrian doctor explained gravely. "A remnant of Verax's bioweapons, her hybrid physiology. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." Gerald refused to accept it. He pored over medical data, consulted with human scientists, tried experimental treatments. But as the days wore on, Fornax grew weaker. "Gerald," she said softly, reaching for his hand, "you must promise me something." "Anything," he whispered. "When I'm gone, you must leave. Our people need to find their own path now." Gerald's voice cracked. "Fornax, I can't." She squeezed his hand. "You've given us a future. Now we must build it ourselves." Tears streamed down Gerald's face as he nodded, making the hardest promise of his life. Days later, he stood before a vast crowd of Zephyrians. Fornax's body, adorned with iridescent flowers, lay on a ceremonial bier. "She saved us all," Gerald said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Now it's up to you to honor her legacy." As the funeral pyre blazed, Gerald boarded his ship. He took one last look at the world he'd helped rebuild, his heart aching with loss and love. The engines hummed to life. Gerald closed his eyes, Fornax's final words echoing in his mind. As stars streaked past the view screen, he allowed himself a bitter smile. They had won the war, saved a civilization, and found a love that transcended species. But in the end, the price of victory was solitude,
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.